Commutify presents Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Each week, we explore the challenging issues transportation demand management professionals face on their journey to transition commuters from driving alone to more sustainable, shared, and active commuting habits. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify. This is Between the Lines with Andy Keaton.
Hi, everyone, and welcome aboard to this week's episode of Between the Lines. This week, we are talking to Venu Garikapati. Venu is a transportation data project leader at the National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL, where he conducts innovative research on travel and energy-related impacts of emerging transportation technologies. An expert in the development of new analytical and computational modeling systems for forecasting travel demand, his research focuses on understanding the impacts of disruptive technologies on travel behavior and the role that big data analytics can play in enhancing the performance of transportation systems. There was a lot there. We're going to get into kind of all of this. But thanks for being on, Venu.
Thank you for having me, Andy. Great to be here.
And we're going to be talking today about a project that you and your team have been working on for quite some time. It's called the Mobility Energy Productivity Metric, or MEP metric. And we're going to be talking, like always, about why this metric will help save the planet. But first, I want to kind of frame this discussion a bit. So let's start off by talking a little bit about why quantifying a problem is so important, and specifically, why is it important to quantify a problem in the mobility space?
To answer your question, Andy, unless we quantify anything, we cannot assess or, more importantly, improve what we are wanting to quantify. Quantification is omnipresent in our lives. We quantify our height and weight to compute our body mass index, which tells about the quality of our health. We quantify the financial activity of any state or even the country with GDP, gross domestic product, or stock indices. In a similar vein, unless we can quantify how efficiently people in a location are connected to goods and services that they want to access, using a selection of modes, motorized or non-motorized, we cannot start improving the quality of mobility in our neighborhoods, cities, states, or even the whole country. So quantifying mobility is the first attempt to improving the quality of mobility is the gist of it.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I wonder, quantifying some things makes sense. It seems straightforward, but mobility is pretty complex. Why do you think it's traditionally been so difficult to quantify, the quality of mobility that a location might provide someone?
hmm Rather than say it's been difficult, I would say that mobility quantification typically happened at scales that were not the most appropriate.
Hmm.
Just as an example, vehicle miles traveled is a good measure. It's measured in terms of total vehicle miles traveled at a city, county, or a state level. It's a good metric, but it would not tell you how much vehicular activity provided the efficient connectivity that a location needs. So, great metric, not the right resolution. There is some other cases, some other efficiency measures that stem from the access domain, which actually quantify how efficiently connected a place is. Metrics that can quantify things like that have typically been used to quantify access to one type of opportunity. For example, access to jobs or access to healthcare using only one mode but not multiple modes. So, access to jobs by car or access to jobs by transit are some of the things that have been quantified for many years, even decades now. These give us a good perspective on the efficiency of connectivity, but in a piecemeal fashion. If there is great access to jobs, it does not mean there is great access to everything else. If there is great access by car,
Mhm.
it does not mean there is great access by other things. So, mobility has been quantified both in the mobility domain and as a proxy through the accessibility research, but it has not been done both at a comprehensive fashion and at a scale that can be readily interpreted and utilized by decision makers across the board. So that's my answer to the difficulty. I'll again emphasize that it's not the onus on the difficulty of the problem. It is viewing the problem in a more comprehensive lens that has been lacking.
It's really interesting. I like that perspective. Yeah, we have been quantifying each individual aspect of mobility and of access, but really pulling it all together is important because, right, it might be great to know that you are close to, healthcare by car, but
Mhm.
does that really mean that you are in a well a place that got good access by other means or to other opportunities. So I'm guessing that's going to lead us in well to talking a little bit more about the MEP metric. I'm assuming you're leading us well into what the MEP metric is and how it helps fill this gap. But I'd love to hear, a little bit more about that.
Not by plan, but I like how the conversation is going. So to answer this particular question, let's actually do a small thought exercise with you and the listeners of this podcast. I'm going to request you and everyone who's listening to this podcast to close your eyes just for a few seconds and think about the location you are in right now. Now
Mm-hmm.
answer to yourself, can you travel to the closest grocery store or back by walking for a few seconds or by walking for a few minutes? How about going there
Mm-hmm.
on your bicycle? Will transit take you to these activities? Or do you have to use your car to travel to all of these activities? That feeling of connectedness that you're getting a sense of in your mind is what the MEP metric essentially tries to quantify. In
Mm.
technical terms, MEP quantifies how well connected a place is and does so while accounting for time, cost, and energy efficiency of all the modes that provide access in a location. MEP builds on accessibility theory and brings in mobility related factors to quantify the quality of mobility in a location. Most of the existing access metrics only use travel time as the deterrence measure. Even as you were doing this thought exercise, the example I gave is if you travel for a few minutes, can you get to an activity? But time is not the only resource we spend while traveling. Choosing
Mm-hmm.
any mode, we invariably expend energy more in some modes than others, and we have to spend monetary costs in order to be able to travel or access places. Right? So when we think about mobility or travel in its holistic sense, any given mode has these complementary aspects going for it: time, energy, and cost. So the MEP metric quantifies the ease of getting to places in various modes in the context of the externalities of these modes. We started with time, energy, and cost, but there are other externalities that we are looking into as well. So that's in essence the, um, our attempt at quantifying the quality of mobility using the MEP metric.
That's I really like that thought exercise because that does it does give you everyone has that kind of sense of how well they're connected to somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
um, and to the opportunities around them, but that's just for their own life and their own situation. It's pretty hard to imagine that for someone else,
Yep.
and some other location, even if you're well aware of those locations and understand what exists there. So that's really interesting. And then adding those other factors, like even for my own area that I know well, I do understand it by time, maybe to a degree because I'm a transportation person. I have a okay understanding of the sort of the cost and the emissions implications, but not really well,
just
just kind of high level, like, oh, this is better and this is
yeah.
worse, and that's kind of it.
No, just thinking about the various modes that we could technically use to get around. If you take car as an example, car is definitely a time efficient mode. There is no denying that. But it's not the
Mm-hmm.
most energy efficient, not the most cost efficient mode to travel, particularly if you're in a car all by yourself. A single
Yep.
occupant vehicle travel is one of the least energy efficient modes there is to travel. But walking and biking, on the other hand, are very cost and energy efficient. They're not the fastest modes to begin with. So if we only look at these modes using time as the lens, car will always come out to be the winner, which is not the case. if we think about all of the resources we are spending while traveling, using these other factors or externalities of different modes actually brings all the modes to the same level playing field, which allows us to compare and contrast when you account for everything, which modes provide you which type of quality of mobility in a location.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important for, for us to start thinking about as individuals and as larger transportation program managers and policymakers and things, to start thinking about how transportation really is, and the impacts that it has on individuals, and yeah, all those externalities that go into it. And that's why one of the reasons I really like the MEP metric is it does kind of start filling those gaps that you talked about, which is, yeah, we've always been measuring this, and just we've been measuring one little aspect. This is trying to put it all together, which is very complicated. How long has your team been working on this, and how many people, and like how many hours do you think you've put into this project?
The hours question might be difficult to answer. I will say though that I am one person representing the MEP team today, but the MEP project itself is the work of many, many talented researchers. The project has been in being for a little over 4 years now. All those years ago, it started as a thought exercise between a few researchers on a Friday afternoon who were, thinking about similar thoughts that we discussed here, where we are like, well, if we want to quantify efficiency of mobility in a location, um, we were wondering if there are tools to do that. So we went in looking for tools. There are a few excellent measures out there. The more popular ones are walk score, bike score, transit score, or the all transit index, which give you an indication of the efficiency of using these modes to get to places. But there is no one metric that combines all of these externalities, particularly the cost and energy, and combines all the modes together. So we put a small thought proposal to the Department of Energy saying, hey, this looks like an exciting idea. Can we explore this? So we started with a very small seed project, which has blossomed into a multi-million dollar research project and a metric. Um, Over the course of 3 years, at least the work of about 10 different researchers coming in from the
Wow.
transportation domain, computational sciences. We even have a chemical engineering PhD on our team who just happens to be interested in transportation.
That's
So
great.
this is a continuous iteration based on feedback that we've received from the Department of Energy headquarters personnel. We've talked to various Department of Transportations, demonstrated the uses of the metric, and have received feedback. So if I have to answer on the order of hours, I would have to ballpark it in the amount of thousands of hours.
Wow.
If I'm only counting the research hours on this, we run the MEP metric on high performance computing systems here at the lab and on Amazon Web Service Cloud. So if we count the compute hours, then we are talking about tens of thousands of hours.
Wow. That's, yeah. I mean, so if you're trying to find a metric that knows what it's talking about, this seems to be the one. And I thought that was funny, actually. A chemical engineer that's working on this, we find a lot in this industry that people working in transportation are not necessarily trained in transportation. There's not really like many, I mean, you could do transportation planning, but besides that, there's not much, like, there's not a transportation engineering PhD probably out there. So this is, even in the, hard sciences, looking at this for years, where we have people coming from different disciplines, it makes it an interesting project, and bringing in different thought processes makes it really interesting.
Yep.
So we have this metric that you're developing. Sounds awesome. What can we actually do with it? Uh, who can use it? What can we do with it? How does it help us as transportation people or as individuals? Who is this for?
Excellent question. So rather than talk about the potential uses of the metric, I'm actually going to talk about a few use cases that we have already utilized the metric for,
Awesome.
and place this in the perspective of work that has either been done or is currently going on. The metric in it in its very basic implementation can quantify the baseline quality of mobility of a location. So when you see that the score is producing a higher magnitude number for a location, it would essentially mean that from that location, you're able to access a greater variety of opportunities using a larger number of modes in a time, energy, and cost efficient manner. So, like any metric quantification, a higher MEP score for a region is better than a lower MEP score. Um, so in quantifying that baseline, our intent is that once you quantify that baseline, you should be able to track the improvement or lack thereof in the overall quality of mobility in that location in response to various external stimulus. These stimulus can be infrastructural investments that are happening in a location, changes in land use that are happening by knowledge or without, or even some decision making strategies where individuals are incentivized to take more electric vehicles. Just as an example, if a city makes investments to increase the adoption of EVs, electric vehicles, over the span of a few years, the MEP metric can capture the increase in energy efficiency of mobility for that city, even if the level of congestion stays exactly the same. So if travel times do not improve over time, but energy efficiency of travel improves, there is no current metric. Maybe I'm being slightly boastful here, but for a reason, there is no current metric that would quantify the energy efficiency difference between these similar network states across years, where the efficiency of travel is coming from energy but not from travel time. So that's just one use case for the metric. For the Department of Energy, this is a metric that has been primarily funded by the Department of Energy, particularly by the Energy Efficient Mobility Systems program in the Department of Energy. So for EAMS, Energy Efficient Mobility Systems program, we've conducted research in conjunction with other national labs on future vehicle technologies or land use scenarios and how automated vehicles or shared automated vehicles or mobility as a service, how can they help improve the mobility energy productivity of cities is research that we've done and we've published on this. There is a Department of Energy report on this. We are currently collaborating with a few state departments of transportation, integrating this metric into the transportation planning processes across various DOTs. This means that when these departments of transportation are planning for infrastructural investments 5 or 10 years into the future, and they want to evaluate the installation of a bike lane across a major corridor versus improvement in transit service, or even, if not the most ideal, um, add a freeway lane mile, how would those infrastructural investments result in improvement in overall mobility energy productivity is an excellent use case for the metric. This is something that we are working with the DOTs currently on. And a final use case that is in the making is the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy, ACEEE, comes out with a clean energy scorecard every year. This year, ACEEE has published the MEP metric as their transportation efficiency measure on their website. From next in subsequent years, our plan is to explore integration of MEP into the scoring methodology for ACEEE. So these are some of the use cases that we've currently been working on. But as I said, I'm not going to talk about potentials. There are a lot of other collaborations that we are interested in seeking out, which increase the impact of the metric in public and the private domains.
And this also speaks to the importance of having a metric like this that goes once again beyond the individual, looking at one use case or opportunity, and thinking more holistically. Because just those three projects you talked about are distinct. They're different. They're all solving a different problem, and it's pretty exciting to see where this goes. I'm hoping some of our listeners are sitting there in their office or in their car or train on the way to work and thinking, I have a project and I'm going to reach out to Venu. I'm sure Venu would be happy to talk to you about a way to use the MEP metric to solve some of the problems you have. So if you're listening, I'm sure he's always available. I'm volunteering you to work collaboratively with our listeners. I hope that's okay.
Sounds great.
Cool. So I want to ask, we're running kind of close to the end of time. So I have two more questions. But I want to ask this one first, and then we'll end with the question we ask all of our guests. So, talked a little bit about what the metric can do, what it is, what it can do, kind of who can use it. I wonder if you can talk just a little bit more about how it can help us kind of track and evaluate the impact of sustainable transportation
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure investments, decision making, kind of down the line. You talked a bit about the idea of like, what if we got people in EVs or in added bike lanes, but how does it actually help you track that and evaluate that over time?
Sure. I'll start by saying that the number one use of the metric, even amongst the ones I described, is that it could potentially add to the arsenal of tools at the disposal of decision makers in evaluating the quality of mobility. We quantify the MEP metric for a fine spatial resolution. So we do this at a square kilometer resolution. If you give us a city, we'll pixelate the city into square kilometer pixels and do this quantification once for each pixel. And then we aggregate the score to any known geography, a census block group, a census tract, a county, or even the whole city. So for the question you asked, if a city is planning investments into more sustainable transportation technologies, year over year, because of changing mobility trends, how is the metric changing, not just in overall terms, but across different modes and across various locations, is probably the biggest use for the metric there is. Through such utilization, if cities can evaluate competing infrastructural options down to the dollar, you can think of benefit as a MEP per dollar kind of measurement, or how will the overall mobility for everybody in the city or for specific social demographics of interest, how is it increasing? That's a top priority for us, and that's a way in which we evaluate both the impacts of sustainable transportation technologies, but also how mobility is improving for individuals across the board. Will businesses make different decisions about their location, knowing about the quality of mobility that their employees can afford based on the location selected, or would people vary their choice in where they want to live if they know the complete picture of the quality of mobility of a location, not just by one mode but by many modes? One thing we don't recognize, Andy, is we might incline towards one mode for a majority of our travel, but all of us are multimodal people. Even a
Mm-hmm.
simple car trip we make, you don't jump into the car on both ends of your trip. Maybe you do that from your garage at your home or the parking lot of your apartment, but you're parking your car somewhere at your destination and walking to your office. So no car trip is a car trip. A car trip is a multimodal trip. Even
Yeah.
for folks who actually use cars for a majority of their trips, we like to take our evening strolls. And in that evening stroll, if a grocery store is nearby, we might want to drop by there. So all of us are multimodal people um, in our nature. If we know about access to opportunities using many modes, I think that could lead to more sustainable travel behavior patterns. Is what we intend to um, popularize through the use of this metric.
I really like how you said that. Yeah, we're all multimodal people. I think, particularly in America, North America, uh, transportation planners probably assume most people drive everywhere, and they're a unimodal person, if that's a term. But yeah, we're multimodal. I like that, and just giving that information about the access to opportunities that exist can help kind of expand that multimodality. Is pretty interesting. Okay, so we're towards the end of our time. We have this one question we ask everyone. We were talking a little before, Vinu, so I'm
Yeah.
excited to hear what you have to say here. But tell us, why will the MEP metric help save the planet?
This is certainly the most interesting question of all. Also, the most difficult one, I'll say, Andy. Uh, Saving the planet is a tall order, which is going to hinge on our collective efforts in making sustainable choices, travel or otherwise. I'm not going to oversell the capabilities of the metric, but one of the key things that I haven't touched on before that we want to bring out through our metric is not just quantify mobility for one given location as a single number, but we want to quantify the quality of mobility for that same location for various socio-demographic cohorts of interest. We all won't have access to the same type of modes. Some people might be car constrained, as you just mentioned. Some people might be transit constrained. So their choice of options for mobility might not even include car. Some people might be constrained on others to be driven, particularly kids who have to be dropped off at daycares or at schools or otherwise. Some others might just have a greater affinity towards walking or biking, just the type of person they are. So, not just one metric for a location, but quantifying quality of mobility for various cohorts of interest, and in doing so, measuring not just the quality but the equality of mobility is how I think we will help make for a better planet. I don't know if this is directly answering your question to save the planet, but I think we should march towards a better planet through our mobility choices and sustainable choices. This is my answer to your question.
I love it. I love the equity lens that you're trying to bring into this. It definitely plays a part. I definitely see how the MET metric can help us save the planet, even if you don't want to say it. But really, yes, make a more livable planet for everyone. Yeah, great answer.
Like we talked about, unless we view all of the modes with a common lens, with all of the externalities included in the mode, we can't have a dialogue on how various modes are competing with one another, and how certain modes come out on top when you consider everything that the mode has to offer. Existing modes are future modes. Electric vehicles is a great example where the energy efficiency of cars is being brought up through the use of electrification. So maybe they are much better than an internal combustion engine vehicle if you're directly comparing between an ICE and an EV.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's. I think there's a lot of opportunity for this moving forward as new infrastructure comes, as new decision making at various levels. Private and public and individuals, and understanding that behavior and being able to quantify something that's really not on the surface a quantifiable thing. A human's behavior is really interesting. I'm really excited to see where the MET metric goes. Thanks a lot to you and your team for putting so much time into this. I know you've been really spending a lot of time, as you said, including the computers. Thanks to the computers, tens of thousands of hours of time. We're really excited to see where this goes. Venu, thanks again for talking to us about this.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Andy. I hope this interests some of your listeners, and I truly hope this leads to more conversations about quantifying the quality of mobility for a better future.
And to everyone who's listening, that's a good segue. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our email list, which you can do at betweenthelines.io. And that way you get emails from us every time there's a new episode, as well as some more information. We'll send out some more information about the MET metrics so you can dive a bit deeper into this. Contact Venu if you have any questions and want to collaborate. I'm sure he wants to. I keep volunteering you for this. And make sure, just to keep up with future episodes that are coming out in the future as well. As well, give us a like and a follow wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you haven't yet, check out the video on YouTube as well that we publish. All of this information, all of the episodes that we have already recorded and will record in the future can be found at betweenthelines.io. Once again, thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this, and we will see you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify.